Tuatahi, he honore he gloria ki te atua he mongorongo ki te whenua, ki te whakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Tuarua e te whare karakia e tenei te nā koe, e te whānau o tēnei whare, kua taimai nei o tēnei ata, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, everyone. I want to acknowledge all of you here. I want to acknowledge our vicar, Helen, and all of you who make up this community. I want to thank you for the invitation of being here this morning. For all of my life that I can remember, St. Matthew in the city has been for me a somewhat distant but very real beacon of hope, of justice, of acceptance, of diversity, of courage, of generosity. It's been a place of searching and a place of finding. And over the years, I have quietly from time to time crept through the back door and attended a service at Christmas or at Easter or some other time I was in the city, never, ever, ever thinking that one day I may be up here and having the privilege of actually speaking to you. And I feel most humbled and honoured to be here today. And only God knows how I got here. I thank you for the invitation. And as your vicar, Helen, has said, I'm the city missioner. And today it's an honour for me to speak on this Social Services Sunday. But I'm not going to speak on social services or social justice, because if there's one community that understands it, it is you. You live it, you reflect on it, you preach on it, you sing on it. The words are there, and they have been here for a long, long time, as are the actions. The challenge, of course, for us in the Christian community is the words are there. They're there beautifully, they're written beautifully, they're sung beautifully, they're preached on beautifully, but the challenge continues to be all about action. And I think that is the challenge that yet again St. James puts before us today. Our faith without the actions that go with it, is dead. A few weeks ago I attended a beautiful service here where Whaia Waiora spoke, and she put before us a whakatauki, he aha te mea nui, what is the greatest? He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It is people, it is people, it is people. And there's a second part to that whakatauki, he aha te huarahi. What is the pathway? I runga, i te tika, te pono, me te aroha. It is doing what is right with integrity and with compassion. It is doing what is right with integrity and with compassion. And that word integrity is the one that can trip us up. For integrity demands congruence between our words and our actions. The matching of the written, the spoken, the preaching with what we do. The issues that challenge us today and call us to action are complex and many. And for many of us, they're almost too much, too daunting. How often do we hear people say to us, I can no longer watch the news. I can no longer read a newspaper. It's just too much, too heavy, too daunting. These are not just issues of faraway lands, of refugees and war and violence. They're issues right at our very doorstep, in our own country. And we as a community are shocked that in our own land and in our own community, we have such levels of violence, of inequality, of poverty, of desperateness, of homelessness. It can become too daunting. We're gifted today to have many great women leaders in our world. And one of these is a woman called Mary Robinson. And Mary was the president of Ireland, first woman president of Ireland in the mid-90s. A remarkable leader of that country, which transformed the presidency from just a ceremonial title, position, to one that challenged just issues around justice. It was little wonder then that Mary Robinson became the UN Commissioner for Human Rights up until the mid-2000s, and was, in her own way, a beacon of hope, courageous woman. And I was watching her being interviewed some years ago on BBC Hard Talk. And Hard Talk is a fairly, can be kind of a brutal type of a interview. And the interviewer looked at her and said, "Madam Commissioner, you've got war, you've got refugees, you've got displacement and violence and poverty all over the world. What's the answer? What's your answer to all this? You've been in the role now for 6 years. What's the answer?" And she just looked at him and said, "The answer is speak to your neighbour." What? Just talk to your neighbour. It's that simple. Now, I think he expected some long economic treatise on how we've got to change systems that cause this and that and the other thing. And she brought it right down to us, you and me, where we live and how we relate with our neighbour, whoever our neighbour is and whoever, no matter how different they are. Get to know your neighbour, listen to your neighbour, understand your neighbour, speak with your neighbour, break bread with your neighbour. Very simple, really. But can you imagine if that was happening right throughout our land and our world? We would perhaps have a different world and a more peaceful world. So we are challenged here always to say, well, who is my neighbour? And that was the challenge before us a few weeks ago in Good Samaritan Sunday, who's my neighbour? And each of us does reflect on that, who's my neighbour. But I ask you today, as a community, St. Matthew in the city, who is your neighbour? Well, I am your neighbour. I am your neighbour, right next door. The Auckland City Mission is your neighbour. We share not only a physical proximity and a boundary, and thank God there's no boundary fence. We share common values, a common Anglican heritage. We share space. We share people. Our deacon this morning, Linda, works here and works with us during the week, as does Wilf, as do others. When I started my role as the city missioner a couple of months ago, it was in this place that I was formally welcomed with an amazing porphyry. And just on Friday, it was in this church that we buried one of our long-term streeties, Paulie, in a beautiful and very moving ceremony here, where many, many street people and homeless people could come in and feel at home. We share a lot in common. And so today I want to just stand here, if I did nothing else today, nothing else, is just to look at you and reach out to you and to Helen and all of you and say thank you for talking with us, for crossing the boundary, for becoming part of or from the very beginning for being part of the Auckland City Mission. One of the first things I did when coming here was meet with Helen, and I committed myself as a missioner to her that we will be good neighbours, that we will not only talk together and get to know each other and break bread together, we will do things together. We will translate the rhetoric into action. There's huge potential for us here, St. Matthew in the City and the Auckland City Mission right next door, to work closer together and to be an even brighter beacon for our city. And I look forward to that. With only 7 weeks in the job, I can hardly stand here today and claim to speak from a lot of experience as Auckland City Missioner. Still very wet behind the ears, and I'm going to use the excuse that I know nothing, that I'm new to the job for a long time to come. But as you do when you go to a new place, whether it be a new country or a new job or a new house or a new community, you notice things. And after a while you stop noticing. The things you notice first actually become the norm, and life goes on. And so it's always very important to note what you notice first of all when you come to a place. And I've noticed a lot in the last few weeks. And there are 3 things I'd like to share with you today of what I have noticed and what I note. My first observation comes from the concept or the theme that those of us who are working on the edge, on the margin, in areas of justice and peace and anti-violence and anti-discrimination, we are a group of companions on a journey. And the word companion in itself is so evocative. You hear it in the Spanish compañero, and you know it comes from the Latin com, pan, share bread. Sharing bread with. That beautiful word companion, to share bread with the other on the journey. So this group of companions who work in that fairly dangerous, often misunderstood, hard place, whether it be in the Christian church or in society in general, the area of challenging injustice and inequality and inequity, what I have noticed is that we are burning ourselves out. I am noticing tiredness. I'm noticing weariness. And I've noticed this for a long time. I noticed the same thing in my career and health. The question is, who cares for the carers? Do we care for each other as carers? Sometimes we're so focused on the job or the mission or the task that we forget that we too are human beings and need caring for. And so I am noticing a need for us, particularly involved in areas of great stress and distress and violence and hardship, to stop and perhaps care a little more for each other. Who cares for the carers? How do we care for each other when we work in these tough areas? How do we do it? So it's a question I leave more than an answer. My second observation comes from, or it's best captured for me, by a quote from the French philosopher Albert Camus, who said, "In the midst of winter, I discovered an invincible summer." In the midst of winter, I discovered an invincible summer. We not only have a seasonal winter at the moment, we have another form of winter in our community. The winter of poverty, homelessness, violence, breakup, this winter of discontent that causes us such disturbance, such unease, such anger. We're caught up in it. But in the midst of this winter, we also see something incredibly beautiful and hopeful. And so I've been at the Auckland City Mission now just for some weeks, and my friends and people say to me, oh, you must be finding it quite disturbing seeing all that homelessness and poverty, all that hunger, all that breakup. And I look at them and I look at you and I can honestly say, what I have noticed most is not that. It is the other side. It is the generosity, the beauty, the compassion, the care, the concern of people. It's amazing, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, and we can be proud that we still live in a compassionate community. And without a doubt, it is oftentimes in our hardest times that the best of us emerge. I'm sure many of you have read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, that even in the harsh German prisoner of war camps, great generosity and heroism emerged. And we see this in this space that we work in the Auckland City Mission, where it is desperate and it is hard, but we are privileged to see generosity on a huge scale. Daily I see it. Hundreds and hundreds of people wanting to help, helping, caring, children bringing in home baking, Chinese Buddhists preparing a meal, a High Court judge quietly packing in our distribution centre, musicians coming in and playing, artists and potters coming in and assisting people to discover the artist within. It goes on and on. So that's my second observation. In the midst of winter, we certainly do have an invincible summer. And my third observation is we do have a very serious situation. Let's not gloss over it. Let's not say there is no crises. Let's not say, oh, it will pass. New Zealand is in a very serious situation at the moment in terms of equity and inequality. The gap between those who have and who have not is growing and growing. And the plight of those who have not is becoming more desperate. And we see that on a daily basis. And we see the growth incredibly disturbing. The numbers of homeless on our streets have doubled in the last 2 years. The Auckland City Mission gives out a lot of food every day to people all over Auckland through our distribution centre, packages of food, family packages to feed a family of 4 for 4 days. Thousands upon thousands of these go out during the course of a year. And we've just tallied up the distribution for the last 12 months. And in the last 12 months, we've given out 25% more food packages than we did last year. That's a growth of 25% in 1 year. And what we're noticing is that there was a time when these were emergency packages to tide a family over for a few days when something had happened. But they're no longer emergency packages. For many of our community, they are required to sustain themselves on a weekly basis. And many of those people are working. They're working. Such is the state of our minimum wage in this country. And I know St. Matthew in the city is at the fore of trying to bring forth in our country the concept and the reality of a living wage. Our so-called minimum wage is in itself an injustice. For it only takes one thing to happen, one car to break down, or a warrant of fitness, or a doctor's appointment, or a school trip, and there's nowhere else to go. And where do we go? Where do many of our people go? They go to these loan sharks who are circling the streets. An observation is that we as a community must look at new ways of giving microfinance to people at a very low rate, because just a couple of $100 that's needed can, in the end, become thousands of dollars upon interest and lead people to be on the streets. So we do have a serious problem, but in the midst of it all, we do have an invincible summer. We are companions, compañero on the journey, and we share bread together. This is a wonderful place to come and share bread. It's a wonderful place to be nourished. It's a wonderful place to care for each other. And as I continue or really commence my mission next door, I'm very conscious that I am your neighbour, and I'm conscious of the potential ahead of us to continue this journey together. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, he manaki kia koutou katoa.